It's a new day on Deep Space Nine, and the O'Brien family are reunited back on the station. Not that we're staying there today, as we've planned a picnic to the planet of Galana. A bit of familial bliss is something O'Brien's not had for a while, which might be why he promises they're never going to be separated again during the picnic. The universe has other plans, and after Molly goes off for a little explore, we hear a scream. We catch up to her in a cave where she's hanging over an ominous purple wibbly. She's hanging for just long enough for O'Brien to get a good look before she falls, with the purple wibbly disappearing after she fell through it to reveal bare floor underneath. Sounds sciencey, so we've soon got a team investigating the cave and its contents, with a focus on the distinctly doorway-like stone that Molly fell through. We're firmly in time-fuckery territory, says Dax, and we've been here enough times before that she's also able to say it farted Molly 300 years into the past. The fact there's no tiny skeleton on the floor suggests she wasn't killed by the fall, so we start trying to figure out how the thing works to get Molly back. A minor kaboom, coupled with the cold of the cave, indicates this might not be the best place for Kirayoshi, so Kira takes him back up to the Defiant while Keiko stays. That's also a chance for an update from Odo, who was gathering data from Bajoran archaeologists. They say the portal was built by a civilization which disappeared a couple of thousand years ago, and arguably deserved it for cocking about with time. The planet was only settled by Bajorans just shy of 100 years back, which means Molly will be alone wherever she landed. Just as well that we're ready to do a science and try bringing her back then. Going through ourselves is clearly very dangerous, so bugger that for a laugh. Instead, we're going to turn the thing on, scan into it for Molly's DNA, and teleport her back through. It kind of works when the teleporter deposits a ragged woman in front of us, and she's clearly not impressed by the change. She's also wearing Molly's bracelet, so either a feral human somehow got to the Bajor sector several hundred years ago and found it on the floor, or this is Molly. Future Molly is 18 years old, according to Bashir, meaning we bollocksed something up with the science wibbly and pulled her back a decade late. On the plus side, that gave her the time to figure out the entire process of making leather based on her outfit, which is no small thing. Obviously, there's going to be a little trouble adapting, which is why Bashir's asked Cisco to set something up in a spare cargo bay to make her more comfortable. That, and time with her parents, will hopefully make the process easier. Of course, that means a babysitter for little Kirayoshi would be useful. Dax has volunteered, despite there being a passing comet she had her heart on scanning, which causes Worf to say he'll take over watching the kid. His experience as a father could be generously described as a bit on the sketchy side, and Dax is not entirely convinced. He's adamant though, and eventually she leaves. To the cargo bay we go, where future Molly wakes to find herself on a blanket. There's a simulated outdoor environment for her, which is a posh way of saying rocks and a tree on some grass, and she decides the tree is the best place to be when she sees her mum and dad. Some food coaxes her down, and she seems to recognize who they are. She even tries to vocalize. A doll is well received too, so they move on to other toys and are eventually able to get her to stop hoarding them and play catch. They're having more success than Worf, at least. Kirayoshi won't sleep despite everything he's tried, and he's now taking it as a personal challenge. This is largely because he's convinced himself Dax is judging his parenting abilities, and he thinks the best way of proving himself capable is to sit and talk about not giving up while a kid lies crying in the other room. Dax is smart enough to shut up and let him get on with it, and he goes back to Kirayoshi. Future Molly's doing better. Seeing her mum brushing her hair triggers a memory, and she sits to have her own hair brushed too. O'Brien's talking to Bashir about it later, and how, whilst not yet talking, she's taken up drawing. They arrive at O'Brien's quarters to find Kirayoshi's doing better now too, and Worf's playing with him and chanting. He claims it's an exercise for battle, but that doesn't stop Bashir from taking the piss. Future Molly is upset. She's been this way for a while, and Keiko has to leave to take Kirayoshi home. The word home is recognized and repeated by future Molly, and the idea seems to calm her, so they take her to their quarters. An initially curious response turns pear-shaped, and she grabs a picture from a previous picnic on the same planet. Keiko tries to tell her going there isn't possible, though O'Brien has had an idea. The holosuite copy does a good enough job to convince future Molly, and she becomes both more happy and more vocal. O'Brien thinks he can swing bringing her here every day to work it out of her system. That might not be enough. When their time is up and Quark says his next customers are waiting, she's distressed at being removed. So much so that she gets a bit handsy. Some panicked scarpering results in knocking a lot of people over, and she shanks one who won't move out of the way with some broken glass before Odo arrives with security and one of them poops yellow at her. Stabbing someone is generally frowned upon, even under the circumstances. The guy wants to press charges, and the best compromise Cisco can arrange is a Federation facility that'll probably keep her in until she's sufficiently adapted. O'Brien thinks that'll just make things worse, and he's got a point if her behavior in a holding cell is anything to go by. Bashir agrees she needs open spaces, and that'll not happen if she ends up at an institution. While this is going on, there's been a problem with Kirayoshi too. It's standard toddler stuff, a trip while playing with Worf, but he's taking it very personally and says he's unfit to be responsible for a child. Ignoring Dax's attempts to reason with him, he leaves. And leaving is O'Brien's idea too, it would seem. He tries to stop Keiko from asking questions so she's not involved when shit hits the fan, but she insists on hearing it. His plan is to take future Molly back to the planet in a nicked megashuttle and pop her through the time wibbly once more. They'll never see her again, but the alternative is her possibly spending the rest of her life locked up. The plan almost immediately goes down the shitter. Knocking out the guy in the holding cells isn't hard, but it must have been noticed as they're spotted by a Starfleet guy during a search. Odo arrives and sends the guy away, which means he's the only one there when he lets the O'Briens go. Perhaps everybody in Ops felt the same way as the megashuttle makes its escape without getting tractor-beamed. They're giving future Molly some supplies before sticking her back through at least, and she rewards them by miraculously expanding her vocabulary to saying she loves them before stepping through. Someone's buggered up the timing again, though, as future Molly arrives next to normal Molly. Future Molly seems to understand who she is and says her mum and dad are on the other side of the wibbly, so she hands over the doll and sends normal Molly through before ceasing to exist. Just in time, too, as O'Brien was about to kaboom it, which may or may not have mattered 300 years ago, depending on how you want to imagine the tech working. Either way, they have their daughter back now, and that's what matters. Kirayoshi has gone when Worf returns home, Dax having dropped him off with the O'Briens. Worf's worried about how they reacted to his accident, but they said he does it all the time and invited them to dinner to thank them for babysitting. Dax also says Kirayoshi kept repeating some words which just happened to be the same ones Worf was chanting at him when they were interrupted by O'Brien and Bashir earlier. Whether that's true or not, it still does the job of cheering him up, and he agrees to the dinner. And back in the O'Brien household, things are getting back to normal. He'll receive a dressing down about that whole knocking someone out and stealing a megashuttle thing, but this is Starfleet, so it'll be forgotten by next week. Molly's no worse for wear at least, and can even make a better version of the drawing future Molly did earlier, so we'll leave them all to wonder if coming back to live on the station again was really the safest choice, until the next adventure. It's the obligatory O'Brien must suffer episode of the season. You could argue Honor Among Thieves fulfills that role, but most of the bad shit there was happening to other people, so I'm not sure it counts. If you watched this one and thought it felt a touch out of place for everything that's going on in DS9 at the moment, well, that's because it is. Much like the earlier Season 6 Episode 1 Little Ship, this story began life as a pitch for TNG. Also, much like One Little Ship, this pitch was rejected multiple times before finally being made here. There may be conclusions to draw from that, but we don't really know how regularly the writing team dips into old ideas, so it's possible such conclusions would be unfair. Anywho, the episode marks the return of the O'Brien family after their evacuation to Earth when the Dominion War finally went hot. Whilst far from safe, we'll assume their return was partly due to a whole fleet getting stationed here now, and there being no major bust-up in the area for a while. So what do we actually get, then? Well, a chance to look at O'Brien's family some more. We've done that a number of times before, of course, but there are some differences here. The obvious ones are that both of the kids are older. Little Kiriyoshi isn't so little anymore, and a year has done quite a bit to Molly as well. Perhaps those changes are what finally cause O'Brien to decide he's not going to be separated from them again. The hokey-cokey approach to having them alternately here and somewhere else might be what's safest for them, but it's no way to raise a family. But then neither is letting them drop through mysterious alien artifacts, so there's really no way of winning in Starfleet, is there? Even a bloody picnic can result in your kids getting time-fuckeried both 300 years into the past and 10 years into the future simultaneously. There is a benefit to this from a production point of view. Having an older Molly meant the character wasn't subject to laws governing how long a minor can be on set, which, ironically, makes this our first real look at her despite being a different actor. If that sounds familiar, it's because we did something similar with Jake in Season 4's The Visitor. There's probably a conversation to be had there about being more interested in the adult versions of characters rather than who they are as children, and what that might say about how we view the personalities and agency of young people, but that's likely enough to fill a whole video on its own. Instead, let's move on to looking at the arguably more interesting B-plot. Worf considers looking after Kiriyoshi to be a way of proving a point. He says it's for Dax, but the fact that he thinks this at all suggests it's not just for her. His time spent as a dad to Alexander is hardly a series of categorical successes. Tangentially, this all ties back into the genesis of today's story. The original pitch for TNG was going to have Alexander be the one affected, and end with him being written out of the show. That would have resulted in removing what I'd argue is the most nuanced part of Worf now, how he struggled with bringing up a child and the way he reacts to those failures. In a way, rejecting the story back then gave us a more complex character as a result. There's probably a moral there about the more difficult choice often being the more rewarding, which is fitting when it's been the running theme of Worf and Alexander's relationship. Anywho, there's a fair bit to unpack about Worf's behaviour in this one, and not just his motivations in wanting to prove himself. There's also the assumption that Dax will want to have children with him at some point, despite that apparently being a surprise to her. How much of what they have together is still Worf running off a script he has in his own head about what a relationship is supposed to be? Does he still just expect Dax to want to follow that template as well, despite how regularly and clearly she stated that's not for her? Is children a topic they've even mentioned in passing? And speaking of mentioning kids in passing, we'll end with an incidental detail from the episode. When Kira casually mentions she might want to have a child at some point in the future, Odo's clearly saddened by the comment. The assumption then is that it's likely their biologies are so utterly incompatible for procreation to be out of the question. But we do know that changelings procreate, at least of a sort. Odo was one of 100 infants sent out to gather data, so the Great Link either has the ability to reproduce or to create an isolated section of the Gestalt free from all memories. You could argue that's essentially the same thing. Anywho, the scene raises larger questions about interspecies relationships and procreation. Does biological compatibility play a role in just how intermingled species become, or do most cultures view fostering without the baggage of our own time? Odo's reaction to the comment suggests that's not an option he'd even considered. It's another example of how a small point can have larger implications, and how visions of even the most optimistic future can be coloured by the stigmas and taboos of our world today. End of episode.
It started slow at first, a user here or there going off to try the alternatives to having your own dedicated place on the internet, your MySpaces and your Facebooks and the like.
The book I read didn't mention anything about that.
Social networks, they called them, as though this place right here weren't just that. Dang sight more social than those places are turned into anyhow.
So these other bits are where everybody is now?
Pretty much, yeah.
That explains why this place is a deserted wasteland.
And why we've been able to hear traffic in distance, but nothing stops here.
Wait, It was vehicle noise that's been playing in the background the whole time?
I think so, yeah. I assume the guy who makes these was trying to make a pun about internet traffic or something.
This place ain't had a user for many a year. That's why I was so excited to see you two. And I've been so lonely.
I mean, you could always come with us.
Really?
Yeah, screw it, why not? Space Dog, Computer, and the artist formerly known as Dancing Baby.
Oh my God, I'm finally leaving this dump.
I thought you said it were better here.
Are you kidding? This place is a shithole. Let's get the fuck out of here.